Welcome everybody to another episode of IGN Unfiltered, our monthly interview show where we sit down with the best, brightest, most notable minds in the games industry. And today I am extremely honored to be joined by one of the best, the brightest, and the most notable of them all, Warren Spector. How are you, sir?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Warren is the creator of Ultima Underworld, legendary game, Deus Ex, top 5 game of all time, in my opinion. Epic Mickey was near and dear to your heart, a big part of your career, and System Shock as well, which you have since returned to. We'll be talking about all of that. So, Warren, I want to hop in the time machine with me and come back, and I want to start with we're going to trace the career of how you got here. And you, if I have it right, when you were a kid, you wanted to be a film critic. Is that correct?
Well, when I was a kid, I wanted to be a paleontologist, but when I got a little bit older, I passed through a lawyer phase, which I'm embarrassed about now. But once I got to high school, I turned into the world's biggest film geek. I was a 7-day-a-week movie guy.
Nice.
I would go to at least one movie literally every single day of the week, and thought for a while I was going to make movies, but realized very early on, as I made my little 8mm movies, that I had no talent. And so film criticism and history seemed like the way to go. So.
Well, I'm sure seeing movies every day probably kept you out of trouble, at least.
Well, it kept me out of trouble, and it gave me this pasty face, you know, so...
I'm in the club.
Yeah, no, it worked out pretty well for me.
So I have to ask you about your college thesis at Texas. It was a critical history of Warner Brothers cartoons.
You did your research, I'll give you that.
I did my best. So that, first of all, that sounds amazing. If I'm a professor, I absolutely want to read that. That had to be fun. Please tell me about this, and did it go over well?
Well, when I was in grad school, I actually team taught an animation history class with some other folks. And so I was pretty up on the history of cartoons, and I never outgrew loving cartoons. I mean, I started watching them when I was, I don't even know, probably 2 or 3 years old, and just never stopped. And particularly loved, Disney and Warner Brothers. And so when it came time to pick a topic for my thesis, it kind of seemed like a natural to write about cartoons. There were things about cartoons that I didn't think other people had spotted before, the way characters developed over time, and all sorts of geeky academic stuff that nobody cares about. But no one at that point, this is how long ago it was, no one at that point had actually written a history of Warner Brothers cartoons, and no one had put together a complete list of every cartoon from the late 20s up until, what was it, 1980 when I wrote that thing. And so I put together the very first complete list of Warner Brothers cartoons. And then a guy named Jerry Beck, who's a world-renowned animation historian, beat me to publication. I was going to publish it, and he came out with his before I could come out with mine. So I got beaten to the punch.
Did you have to get that vetted by the professor before you did it, or do you just do it and spring it on the professor?
No, you have to get it approved. Your topic, your first 3 chapters, you have to get it approved. But luckily,
was it a tough sell?
No, not at all. Actually, at the time, cartoons, were all considered avant-garde and very much part of film art. So it wasn't a tough sell, but I'll tell you, it's kind of a funny story. When you write a master's thesis, there's a very strict format you have to put it in. The margins have to be just the right size, and the page numbers have to be in just the right place. And I got it back from the printers, my copy, and everything was wrong.
Oh, no.
Everything was wrong. And it was the last day to submit it. So I said, well, what the heck? What do I have to lose? So I brought it over to the administration building and took it to the woman whose job it was to take a template and put it on every page and make sure that your margins were right and your numbers were in the right place. And I knew I was going to fail. But she opened it up and she looked at the title and she started laughing and she closed it and said, "You pass." So she never even used the template on the thing. So I got really lucky on that one.
Before I move off of this topic, because I think this is fascinating, do your parents are they supportive of you doing when they find out about this thesis, or they think you're wasting our money?
Well, I think when I was going to see movies 7 days a week, they thought they were wasting their money. So I don't think they ever quite got over it. They wanted me to be an orthodontist and make movies on the weekends. That was their big plan for my life, and I kind of
the
thwarted
dentist
them.
who moonlights as a filmmaker.
Exactly. It sounds like something in a film somewhere. You know?
So when did you start getting interested in video games then?
Well, I started getting interested in video games. I don't know that I could give you a year, but I got an Atari 2600. Actually, it was before that. What am I talking about? I saw Pong in a bar.
Sure.
And well, it was probably a restaurant because I was too young to go into bars at the time. But sunk a lot of quarters into that and did the whole arcade thing. And my folks got me some knockoff Pong game, that had Pong and some controllers and a gun for a shooting game. And so I was pretty sucked in by that. But it really started when I got an Atari 2600 and played Adventure for the first time, and I was done.
Makes sense. We've all got that game. We've all got that
I have
spot.
it. I got it again for Christmas. I got a little
great.
thing like this big that plays 60 Atari
the TV,
games.
the plug-and-play TV thing.
You don't even have to plug it in. It's just a standalone.
Nice.
It's got like 60 Atari games on it.
Richard Garriott was in here. He was kind enough to do this show as well, fellow Austin game developer.
Sure.
And he told me that he wouldn't mind if I told you that, in his opinion, the Ultimas that he worked on with you were the best ones.
Wow.
How does that make you feel to hear that?
Well, honored, obviously. It's he's done some pretty good work. It was Ultima 4 that convinced me that video games could be more than just killing monsters and saving princesses. He had a pretty big impact on my life in a variety of ways.
Yeah, how did you end up at Origin and subsequently Looking Glass?
Oh, how much time do you have?
I'm always curious. I mean, because that was your start, really, right? As a professional.
Well, I started working on tabletop games at Steve Jackson Games, and then went to TSR and worked on a bunch of Dungeons and Dragons stuff. So that was really kind of my start. But Richard gave me my first shot in the digital game world. And how that happened was, I used to go to science fiction conventions all the time. And once I was working at TSR, I would be a guest at all these conventions. And Richard and I ended up on a panel together. And I was talking about AD&D, Advanced Dungeons and Dragons. Sure. He was talking about Ultima 5, the game he was working on. And I was sitting there thinking, wow, we've got all these TSR video games coming out that I don't like very much. And this guy's talking about this genius game he's working on. And he did Ultima 4, and we just started hitting it off. We were on a panel together, and just, I was finishing his sentences and he was finishing mine. Great. And a while later, it was probably, a few months later, I got a call in my office, actually at TSR, asking if I was interested in an associate producer job at Origin.
Call me on my home phone.
Yeah, really. I jumped at it. The opportunity to work with Rich and the opportunity to make computer games at the time. I was playing them obsessively, more than I was playing the tabletop role-playing stuff by that point. The opportunity was there, and I jumped at it.
So Ultima Underworld it's known. I feel like it's almost kind of a like hipster type knowledge where it's if you know about but is Ultima Underworld one of the most underrated games ever?
I worked on it, so I'm not sure you want to say. I'm not sure I'm the one to say. But probably, yeah. Maybe not underrated, but underappreciated, I guess.
Yeah, I guess that's more what I'm going for. I just feel like it doesn't get its due especially now. I mean, it's still, the ideas it put forth and the game systems it put forth are still very relevant now.
Yeah.
You're still iterating off of them now.
I am. My entire career, it's kind of pathetic, but my entire career has been about trying to recreate the feeling I had in 1978, the first time I played Dungeons and Dragons. And Ultima 6 and Ultima 7 were kind of steps along that path, but if you look at Underworld and Underworld 2 and System Shock and Thief and Deus Ex, and they're all like, even Epic Mickey, they're all kind of in a line, trying to empower players to tell their own stories a little bit better every time. And Underworld was really kind of seminal in that. It was, if not the first, certainly one of the first of what we call immersive simulations.
Yeah. Do you remember where the idea for it came from?
Yeah, the idea for that came right from Paul Neurath, who was a guy I had worked with at Origin. He did a game called Space Rogue, another underappreciated game, by the way. And he and I worked on that together. And one day, he came to Origin with a demo of a real-time, first-person perspective, fully textured 3D dungeon. And I remember standing around with a bunch of Origin folks, and they were all looking at it going, yeah, that's kind of cool. Yeah. And I looked at it and said, no, don't you realize the world just changed? Everything's different now. And I got the opportunity to work with Paul on that. But really, it started with that tech demo. And then a story. It wasn't even supposed to be an Ultima story originally. And Richard is the one who suggested that we attach the Ultima name to it just to make sure people noticed.
Yeah, prop it up.
Yeah, exactly. You know, help it find its audience. And I think that probably worked out pretty well.
Seems like it, and you're working with Paul today, and we'll get to that later.
Okay.
So then System Shock. That's, you know, where does System Shock come from? Because it's still that. There's no hipster situation there. That's, everybody knows System Shock, and everybody should.
System Shock actually came from two different directions at once. On the one hand, Paul Neurath, you know, again, boy, talk about an underappreciated guy. But Paul and a guy named Doug Church, secret master of gaming. I've been trying to make that guy famous for the last 25 years.
He stays in the shadows.
I know. He's like Garrett the Thief.
Fittingly.
Yeah. But they were kind of tired of working on fantasy games, which we had all been doing for a while, and were working on their own end on a science fiction game in the spirit of Underworld. And at the same time, I was working on a thing I called Alien Commander. In fact, I recently came across the original design spec for Alien Commander, which was my response to being tired of making games about guys who wear plate armor and swing big swords and all that. And so because we were all, you know, buddies, and because we had worked together on several games by that point, we just sort of looked at each other and went, hey, wait a minute, you got chocolate in my peanut butter, you know, and decided to work together on what became System Shock.
So that of course does great, and you're on fire at that point, but you end up leaving Looking Glass. I'm curious why you decided to leave, because I mean that place was, I mean, certainly now regarded as absolutely legendary.
Well, let's be clear. Actually, I was still at Origin.
Still at Origin.
I was at Origin. Origin published Underworld, Underworld 2, and System Shock, and I was working out of Austin, Texas. Paul kept on trying to get me to move to Boston, and I kept on. I probably shouldn't say that. Richard will be mad at Paul now. But anyway, you know, I was working with them on those games, but I was still at Origin at the time, and I left Origin to join Looking Glass a little bit later on, right after. When was that? It was like 1996, I guess.
Pre-Thief.
Yeah. Well, it was Thief was kind of in the middle of its development cycle.
Okay.
I came into Thief in the middle year of its 3-year development cycle, when it went from Dark Camelot to Thief, the Dark Project.
Yeah.
So I got the chance to work with Doug and Paul again on Thief at that point, and I did leave Looking Glass at one point. There were a couple of reasons for it. I was actually still working out of Austin because I refused to work
Looking Glass Austin, right?
Right. I built an office for Looking Glass down there, and okay, let me be completely honest. Looking Glass never had a lot of money, and there came a point where there wasn't really money to have an Austin office. Paul said, yeah, we don't really have enough money. We just wanted you to work here. And I went, don't. And worked on Bob Costas baseball for a while, and worked on a science fiction game called, interestingly enough, Junction Point. And spent a lot of time just trying to raise money. And ultimately, I just said, Paul, shut down my studio. It'll be fine. I'll find another deal. I'll keep everybody employed. Save yourself.
So you really weren't interested in moving to the East Coast then, because it sounds like you were happy working with all these guys.
Oh, I loved them.
But I mean, you've managed to put down just unshakable roots in Austin to this day for your entire career.
Yeah, you'd have to blast me out of Austin. It would take an atomic bomb, I think. Yeah, I love those guys. I loved them then. I love them now. I've spent half of my time at GDC hanging out with those guys, But I grew up on the East Coast, and I said I'll never live anyplace cold ever again.
Yeah, you're from New York, right?
I'm from New York.
Yeah.
I lived in Chicago for 5 years. I spent 2 years in Wisconsin. That was enough. I want warmth.
Fair enough.
So I stay down there.
In my opinion, Looking Glass is the closest thing the game industry has to the Beatles of game studios, in that it was a relatively short period of time that they were active,
Yeah.
but their work is hugely influential, and it's still revered now. What do you think of that, of my opinion of that?
I think Looking Glass has been incredibly influential, and I'm proud of them and proud of my part in that. I remember when Looking Glass finally did shut down, everybody at Looking Glass was obviously upset, and rightly so. But everybody in the world of gaming was upset about it, or at least everybody who knew about Looking Glass. There was a lot of crying and rending of garments and gnashing of teeth and everything. And I was just telling everybody, no, this is actually a good thing, because Looking Glass was this tiny company that we used to think of ourselves as like the kings of the cult classics. And we worked on these influential games, but it was just us. And when Looking Glass shut down, what I knew was going to happen, it was going to be like a dandelion, that you blow in the wind, and all of a sudden, all these seeds were going to go out there and seed the entire industry. And instead of there being one place, exactly,
I guess Doug, I don't know where, Doug stays quiet. We don't know where he was at Valve for a while.
He was at Valve for a while, yes. That was more recent. Doug became a Ronin. He would go around and help everybody else do their thing. It's pretty remarkable. But Irrational came out of that. It just so much came out of the end of Looking Glass that at the end of the day, I actually think the game industry is genuinely better for it. And we genuinely see different kinds of games now than we used to. There are even little Looking Glass tendrils at Bethesda. They're everywhere. We're everywhere.
Before I move to Ion Storm and Deus Ex, I've got to ask you about Thief, because in my opinion, well, Thief 2, which I think you were not.
I had nothing to do with Thief 2.
But Thief itself, I think Thief is the best stealth game. I don't think stealth has ever been done better than in Thief. But the story goes that Thief 1, the Dark Project, you guys hedged your bet with the whole zombie, more actiony stuff towards the end, in case people didn't go for the whole stealth, non-lethal thing. Is there anything to that?
Not as much as you might think. That team was adamant about focusing on stealth to the exclusion of everything else. In fact, I know we're going to get to Deus Ex at some point, but a lot of the reason Deus Ex exists is because of the stubbornness, the appropriate stubbornness of the Thief team. There's a lot to the story of Deus Ex, but one of the things that really drove me was a moment when I was playing Thief, an early build, and I just was not good enough as a sneak thief to get past some guards. And I went to the team and I said, let me let me fight these guys. Please, just make me strong enough to fight these guys because I can't sneak past them. And everybody, it was like, no. It was like I was boiling babies or something, you know. And boy, I wish I hadn't said that out loud. Anyway, they said no. If we let you fight, no, that's what everyone will do. No one will sneak anymore. And I was convinced that they were wrong about that, and that it was possible to make a game where you could fight or sneak. And I made a silent vow right then that I was going to show those guys that it was possible. I was going to build another team to do that. And that's one of the reasons Deus Ex exists, out of my frustration with this genius team of people I love who made Thief. So
we got 2 great games out of Thief then, Thief and Deus Ex.
Yeah.
So yes, let's talk about Ion Storm now, the sort of next
Suck it down.
Next phase of your career. That wasn't you. That was
John. That was not me.
Apparently, you were all set to go make a Command and Conquer RPG for EA.
God, you did your research.
Until John, that's my job here, Warren. I have like one job. That's it. Until John Romero called you. So was it? And I mean, a Command and Conquer RPG sounds like a pretty good deal in that. You know it's going to get big exposure, you know it's probably going to do well, you're probably going to get significant resources from a major publisher. So was John's offer just clearly something you couldn't refuse?
Well, can I back up a little bit?
Please, this is your story. Okay. I'm doing my best to shepherd it.
Deus Ex actually started earlier than that. It was around 1994 while I was still at Origin.
Wow.
I put together a pitch for a game called Troubleshooter, where you played Jake Shooter, ex-CIA, now private eye, who takes the jobs that his moral and ethical ideas will let him take. You know, it's all very film noir, and a lot of the ideas that eventually ended up in Deus Ex started with that. I called it the real-world role-playing game, and Origin and EA weren't interested at all, which is probably a good thing, because the technology at the time wouldn't have allowed me to make anything resembling the real world. But so I shelved that idea, you know, and worked on a bunch of other stuff. And then when Looking Glass Austin shut down, when I told Paul just save yourself, you know, I decided to do a startup, and I had a contract, you know, to do the Command and Conquer role playing. I can't believe you know that. I never talk about that because I don't know if I'm allowed to.
But statute of limitations. We're good. Don't worry about it.
It's public now, and there was. This is true. People do not believe when I say this. I had a pen poised over a contract, and the phone rang.
Wow.
And it was John.
That's like out of a movie. You're about to sign, and all of a sudden the phone goes off.
I know. And John said, I want you to join Ion Storm and make a game. And I said, I can't, John. I've got a contract right here. I'm about to sign a contract. And he said, don't sign that contract. I'm driving to Austin tomorrow, and I'm going to change your mind.
Wow.
And he did. He drove down in his enormous Hummer, you know, I guess trying to make a big impression. But he drove down.
Well, that was post-id John. I mean,
yes, it was. Yes, it was. And he said, make the game of your dreams. You will get no creative interference at all. You will have the biggest budget you've ever had in your life, and the biggest marketing budget you've ever had in your life. Who says no to that?
Well, that definitely trumps the EA offer. I mean, how can it not?
Right. I mean, that's an opportunity that never comes along. And here it was, you know, just dropped in my lap.
But you believed him, clearly. You didn't just think he was, you know, blowing smoke trying to get you to sign with him?
Yeah. I mean, John is one of the genuinely good people in this business.
I've had the pleasure of meeting him a few times.
He loves games more than any other human in the world. He's a good human, and you know, I didn't know him well, but I had known him for a while, and yeah, I trusted him. And you know, he was making the game of his dreams at the time, and Tom Hall was getting to make the game of his dreams. And so I figured, why shouldn't I get my shot? You know. And the other thing, look, I mean, let's be realistic about this. What's the cost of failure in the game business? It's not like, cancer isn't cured or world peace is threatened. It's, I could
Tens
always...
of millions of dollars, just money.
And I'm never going to work again, but yeah, it's just money, And so I figured just take the risk. What the heck?
So is that when the idea comes back off the shelf and you start going to work at it again?
Well, the idea came off the shelf. The Command and Conquer role-play game was going to be Troubleshooter set in the world of Command and Conquer, okay? Just to be clear. But the real-world role-playing game, that idea never died. So I got out the old Troubleshooter pitch and, sort of blew the dust off it. And I had the remnants of my Looking Glass Austin team, and we just started concepting things out. And one of the first things we realized was it was still not possible to recreate the real world. So we just sort of arbitrarily said, it's 2052,
Right.
What's the world going to be like then? And
Well,
that was where we started.
I was going to save this for later, but you've left me a perfect segue. It's a little eerie that the Deus Ex, which shipped in 2000, didn't have the Twin Towers and its New York skyline.
That's the result of a massive conspiracy. No.
The Illuminati.
The Illuminati are behind it, yeah, Majestic 12. No, it's an innocent mistake by an artist, and none of us caught it.
Wow.
It is just an eerie coincidence, and it kind of freaked me out a year after we shipped when someone pointed it out to me, because I even at that point I hadn't noticed it.
Yeah. So I'm curious, when did you know that you had something special with Deus Ex? I mean, you'd had this great idea, it was your dream project, you'd been developing it, but I suppose, you never know if it's going to work until you make it. So
Right.
At what point in the process, it's such a systems-oriented game, there's such player choice and such emergent gameplay. At what point, do you know early? Is it not till the end? When do you know it's something special?
Well, one answer to that is you never know. You never know. I mean, right before we shipped, I remember, putting my head down on my desk and just saying, if people compare our combat system to Half-Life at the time, we're dead. If people compare our stealth model to Thief, we're dead. If people compare our role-playing to, what was it, Baldur's Gate at the time, we're dead. But if people realize they can do everything, we're going to rule the world. So even the day before we shipped, I didn't know. But the other way to think about it is early on, we built what we called a Proto Mission. Now I guess you'd call it a vertical slice. Yeah, at the time that was not a term of art yet. But we built an entire mission set in the White House with all of our game systems hacked together as we had documented them. And it wasn't great, but you could see the potential. You could just sort of feel it, And then about a year later, we had 2 complete missions that were fully playable and not hacked, still as documented, so it wasn't the final stuff, but you could see that the potential was even greater. And then September 1999, we were done and theoretically ready to ship, except we weren't done. The game was not good at that point. You could still see the potential, but I had a bunch of people come in and play the game. I mean, people who from the game business.
People you trust.
Yeah, don't ever tell your publisher you're doing this. But I had them come in and play, and a bunch of our games, they could all see the potential too. But a bunch of our game systems weren't working. Our skill system that I'd come up with was terrible, and the augmentation system wasn't working, and there was just a bunch of stuff that wasn't right. And luckily, at that point, IDOS, our publisher, they really saw the potential and they wanted the game to be right. And so they gave us another 9 months.
That's right, June 2000, right?
June 2000, June 22nd, I believe.
Either the same day or a week out, like right next to Diablo 2.
Yes.
As it so turned out.
And
another game that was kind of a big deal.
Yes, a bigger deal in most ways that publishers care about. Diablo 2 crushed us. And to be completely frank, I had Diablo 2 on my hard drive until about 6 weeks ago. So
I believe it.
That was quite a special game.
Yeah. So it is I've told you this before. I'm not saying this for the cameras. I really think Deus Ex is a top 5 game of all time. It is for me, certainly, and it's my memories of it, and it was such an experience. Do you agree that it's Hall of Fame caliber, that it's one of the greatest ever?
All I will say is that it is one of the games I'm most proud of. And I'm most proud of it because it demonstrably influenced other developers. With that, I'm really not going to name names here, but I've had several developers come to me and say they redesigned the game they were working on when Deus Ex came out because of having played it.
Because they would have been embarrassed had they shipped after you.
or they, I had others tell me that they changed the way they thought about their own work after that, and their games ever after were different because of it. So it really did have some influence, and that's not me bragging. It's just a fact. Yeah. So there's that, and also. How many games in the history of video gaming still matter 17 years after they came out?
It's not a long list, really.
It really isn't, and so I'm humbled by that. But it also says that we did something special. I mean, I had a very special team on that project, and we did something special together. And so I have to acknowledge that, or I'd be a total hypocrite.
Are those developers that you're very politely not naming, is it that when those developers come to you, is that the highest form of flattery, I guess? Is that the best feeling after a Deus Ex versus the sales or critical acclaim?
I could care less about sales. I don't care much about reviews. I don't read reviews. My wife and my mother read the reviews and interviews and all that stuff and tell me when someone gives me a hard time. So no, those are not very important. Influence is very important to me. I'm now old enough that the word legacy means something to me. My wife hates when I say that because it sounds like I'm an egomaniac, but leaving something behind is very important to me. The most important thing is what I heard and still hear from players. The whole idea of Deus Ex was to recreate the feeling of playing Dungeons and Dragons and telling stories with your friends. Not being told a story, but telling stories with your friends and with a dungeon master. Yeah. And so in Deus Ex, what we were trying to do was lay out the skeleton of a story. Here's why what you're doing is important. And then let players own the minute to minute. And have every player finish the game having had a unique experience. And I heard from a lot of players. And so I know we succeeded at that. Players had unique experiences, and they did things that we didn't know could be done in the game that we made. I mean, I'll give you one specific example. Sure. A year after we shipped, I was at the IDOS offices in San Francisco, and our lead publisher side tester, Charles Angel, was demonstrating the game for some IDOS execs. Now, I mean, don't ask me why IDOS execs needed a demo of a game that had shipped a year later that had won a bunch of Game of the Year awards. But be that as it may, he was in a place I had played 100 times, and he was in a place that I had watched other people play probably 1,000 times. And it was a place where there was a guard and an open doorway with laser triggers that would set off an alarm. And then on the other side of this doorway, 2 guards on patrol, a timed patrol. Okay. And three problems, okay? And I saw this guy moving an explosive barrel here and a little explosive barrel there, and then he backed up and hid and got out the pistol, the weakest weapon in the game, and with one shot solved all 3 of those problems. And I just fell on the floor because I knew I didn't know for a fact, but I assumed that no one on planet Earth had ever tried that before. And I worked on the game, and I was watching him set this up thinking, is that gonna work? Is that gonna work? And it did. You know, that tells me that we made a game where players could solve problems their own way, you know? And so So that's when things get really exciting, when listening to players have a dialogue about the game that isn't just about how they killed a boss or how they saved a princess, you know?
So you mentioned John Romero offered you unlimited resources and time. So I'm just curious, was anything left on the cutting room floor with Deus Ex? Like anything that you wanted, I should say. Not, I'm sure you tried things out that didn't work, but was there anything that you wanted in the game that didn't get in?
Okay, I am a kitchen sink designer. Okay, I'm a big believer that the way you make a game is you get a big slab of marble, and then you start slicing off the stuff that doesn't look like the statue you want to make.
Yeah.
Okay, and so there was all sorts of stuff that I wanted in the game that didn't end up in there. I mean, there was a war between the Russo-Mexican alliance and the free country of Texas. Austin, my hometown, was going to be invaded by Russo-Mexican armies. I mean, there was no way to do that in a game, for crying out loud. And we were going to have a raid on a FEMA camp where you had to free 2,000 prisoners. I mean, there was no way to do that. There was all sorts of stuff that I wanted in the game that the lead designer, Harvey Smith, and some of my other designers, notably like Steve Powers, they would browbeat me and say, "We can't build this, we can't do this." And finally I gave in and we cut a bunch out of the game, just a bunch.
Interesting. So later, Deus Ex Invisible War, sequel, comes out. It's good, but it wasn't as well received as the original. Is that an underappreciated project to you, or do you have any regrets about it?
I think it's underappreciated is probably a pretty good word. I think it's a better game than people give it credit for. It was following a game that a lot of people just really, really loved. I think topping ourselves would have been a little rough. I think also we made some mistakes. I mean, there's no doubt about it. We were trying to reach a broader audience. Deus Ex sold pretty well. I mean, at this point, I think it's probably sold about 2 million copies, which is good, not great. But we wanted to reach a larger audience. And we took some input from our publisher that we probably shouldn't have. I think things like Unified Ammo, that was probably a mistake.
Yeah.
Putting the hero in a purple jumpsuit, I mean, what were we thinking? So we made some mistakes. There's no doubt about it. In one sense, probably the biggest mistake we made was focusing on the console version, frankly, to the exclusion of the PC version. The PC version we did very, very late, and so I think our core audience, the PC gamers, were justified in giving us a hard time.
Yeah, because that was the original Xbox,
yeah.
and there were that just had such memory limitations compared to a PC at the time. That were tangible when you played the game.
Yeah, I mean the major ramification of that was our maps got much smaller, and one of the things that made Deus Ex work was we could put you in a position where you could look around and see that you were at a choice point. I mean, it sounds crazy and almost sort of reductionist in terms of design, but we wanted you to know, hey, you're at a place where you could go, full on, fighting, or you could sneak around, but you have a choice to make here. And for that to work, you had to have, vistas. Mm-hmm. And the first game, we were able to pull that off because we had PCs to play with. And the second game, the memory limitations meant that our maps got much smaller. And so a lot of what made Deus Ex work went away. You wouldn't think something that simple could be so profound, but it really was.
So, and then after Deus Ex Invisible War, your Ion Storm Austin team also got to make the first Thief game since Looking Glass shut down, which was Thief Deadly Shadows was the name of it.
Yeah.
Remember that correctly?
Yes,
yeah. I reviewed that game back at Xbox Magazine. That was received very well. The most controversial thing you guys did with that was to default the camera to third person, but thankfully you could hit a button and go back into first person classic Thief style.
Right.
Any good or bad memories of that project?
Well, it was It was interesting in that it came together very late. Let's just say, let me choose my words very carefully. No, it came together very, very late, and so the last 3 months of that project were a death march. That's mostly what I remember of Thief: Deadly Shadows. I also remember that who was it? Jordan Thomas? I think it was Jordan.
Shalebridge Cradle.
Shalebridge Cradle
the
was
best mission.
Unbelievable
mission.
I think that was the best Thief mission ever in any of the 3 games. And
even better than Rooftops or.
I think it was.
2, I think that was.
I think that was the scariest and best Thief mission ever.
Yeah.
And so there were some pretty high points there. I think I did a pretty poor job of managing that team. I was pretty focused on Invisible War and I'm just running the studio. I mean, the studio at that point was. I mean,
2 teams, right?
It was 2 teams and about 100 people, which at the time seemed like a big team to me. No longer does that seem like a big team. But I was a little too focused on running the studio, and to be fair, at that point, Invisible War was the first time Harvey Smith directed a game, and Thief: Deadly Shadows was the first time Randy Smith directed a game, and I should have given them more support. I mean, it's as simple as that. I'll own my poor mentoring of those guys as part of the problem. But really, like I said, Thief crunch was pretty dramatic there at the end.
So eventually, the Ion Storm Austin ends. The entire Ion Storm sort of situation came to an end.
Yep.
But not long after, Junction Point. Because that's the next move, and Disney comes along. Now, before I get to Epic Mickey itself, you're a huge Disney fan. You mentioned at the beginning of the interview with watching cartoons.
Is there a camera that can get my socks?
Oh, I don't know if maybe Sean over here, our producer, can. He is wearing Disney socks today. If you can get in on that.
Right now.
Mickey and Donald and Goofy
it's the
back
whole
there.
crew right there. Okay.
So do not doubt this man's enthusiasm. Where does that Disney enthusiasm come from, Warren?
It comes from like 2-year-old Warren. One of the first movies I ever saw was Sleeping Beauty, and when Maleficent turns into a dragon, I had nightmares for years after that. Walt Disney loved scaring kids, and he scared me, and I loved it. It was the most delicious scare in the world.
How do you go to Disney World or Disneyland a lot?
I haven't been there since Junction Point shut down, honestly. It's a little too painful for me. But I used to go a lot.
What's your earliest memory of one of the parks? Did you get to go as a kid?
Amazingly, I didn't. My folks were not big Disney fans, and so I was. I was actually pretty old before I went, and my most vivid memory. My most vivid memory of. I have 2 really vivid memories, but one of them was in the 30th anniversary of Disneyland. I turned 30 the same year Disneyland did. We were both born in 1955. And they were giving out prizes for the 30th person through the turnstiles and the 300th person and the 3,000th person. And I was the 3,000th, I can't even say it, 3,000th person through the turnstiles during that anniversary summer on that particular day.
Yeah.
And alarms started going off, and I was terrified.
Oh, no.
A guy, one of the guys who's like sweeping up says in this goofy voice, "That's Mr. 3000. That's Mr. 3000." And he sort of broomed me over. He swept me over to a prize redemption center, and I got a Mickey Mouse watch that I still have. And that day, I'm convinced that there were secret cameras, following me and my friends around that day, because we didn't wait on a line ever. I mean, It's like we would get to a ride and there'd be no line.
The seas parted.
Yeah, it was magical, And here's the most remarkable thing of all. I took a bunch of pictures. This was in the days of film, okay? I took a bunch of pictures, and I had my camera set wrong. And so I assumed that none of the pictures would come out. And over the course of many years, I have no idea what happened to that roll of film. It's gone. It's lost in to the seas of time. And years later, I found a roll of film in the bottom of my closet and got it developed. And it was all the pictures from that day, and every one of them had come out.
That's awesome.
Every one of them.
It was so great.
It was unbelievable.
So, do you have any pro tips for doing Disneyland properly? You said you've been a lot of times. Are any secrets we need to know?
Well, get there early. That's for sure. Have a plan. Always go in with a plan. Know where you're going to go and when. That's probably the most important thing. I'm a big believer in take the behind the scenes tour. It's remarkable. I mean, I was lucky enough that I got to give people tours of Disneyland when we were promoting Epic Mickey.
Yeah.
And that's a real thrill. Find a way to walk around the parks with an Imagineer sometime. That's my best pro tip. It's not easy to pull off, but if you can, that's a remarkable experience.
Have you ever been in Club 33?
I have been in Club 33. I've been in there 3 times now. And here's the sad thing. The first time I was in there, they actually have Club 33, paraphernalia, right? And they have a gold ring, and I wanted one so badly. Oh man, I wanted one. And I asked, can I buy one of those? Because you can buy hats, and I've got hats, and I've got shirts, and Club 33 stuff. But I wanted one of those rings, and the guy who was selling stuff said it's $5,000. And I said, I will write you a check right now. And he said, I can't sell it to you. Only members can have the ring. And so I said, how do I become a member? And you just have to apply, and you get on a waiting list. And about a month after Disney shut down Junction Point, I got my membership. I got off the list. And at that point, I was frankly heartbroken. I mean, there's no other word when Junction Point went away. And so I didn't become a member, and I don't have the ring, and it's all very sad, and now it's too late.
It's never too late.
You're right. It's never too late.
It's never too late.
You're right.
So when Disney buys Junction Point and sets you up with Epic Mickey, I mean, is that just a dream come true for you, having watched Disney cartoons and been a fan since you were a little kid?
It was absolutely a dream come true. I mean, my mother said it's about time when I told her I was working for Disney. She didn't say, "Are you crazy?" or "That's fantastic." It's just it's about time. But let me tell you what I walked away from to join Disney, which may put this in perspective.
Yeah.
I was working with a bunch of Hollywood directors at that point. I originally created Junction Point because I wanted to collaborate with people in Hollywood.
Hence the name?
Well,
Junction Point?
That was one of the reasons why, yeah. But I was working with John Woo, the film director John Woo, on a game called Ninja Gold. We created this world together, and he was going to make a movie. We had a film deal, and I was going to make the game. We had a game deal. And there came a day when I had to call John Woo and say, John, I'm sorry, I can't do this because I'm about to join Disney. And it was a tough decision, but it really wasn't.
Not given everything you just told me.
No, it wasn't tough.
Did you get to cross off any Disney-related bucket list items while you were making that game, like while you're a part of Disney and making Epic Mickey, like access to archive props or art film cells, anything like that?
Oh gosh, yes. I mean, there were so many. I got to hang out in the archives. I got to know the archive people really well. They're phenomenal people. Holy cow. There are 7 archives on the various Disney campuses, and I got to go into every single one of them.
Cool.
I got to hold things in my hand that you would not believe. The first time I went into one of the archives, they asked me what I wanted to see, and I said, I'd like to see everything you have from Alice in Wonderland. And they just laughed and laughed and laughed. It was unbelievable because they have so much. I mean, Disney never threw anything out. I got to sneak into the tunnels under the Ink and Paint building where the original Disney morgue was.
Wow.
That became the archives. And found the place where the morgue used to be. My gosh, I mean, I got to go into Walt's apartment at Disneyland. And
up above Main, is that Main Street?
It's on Main Street, above the fire station.
Yeah.
I cried like a baby in that room. You can feel the man's presence in that room. It's one of the most powerful feelings I've ever had in my life. I got to give a presentation in the Hall of Presidents.
Cool.
You know, with all the animatronics. You know. Yeah, there were so many bucket lists. I mean, I got to pitch a game to Bob Iger and John Lasseter, for crying out loud. You know, I gave a lecture about story and games at Pixar. How many bucket list items, you know? And there's one I will not tell you about, but there was one other one that was pretty darn special.
Maybe next time.
Maybe next time. Yeah, a lot of people will get in trouble if I tell you about it.
Fair enough. So how do you feel about Epic Mickey, the game, in hindsight? You know, it turned out well. It did get a sequel, but it felt like as a gamer that you know, the Wii had kind of started to tail off a little bit. And so when you think of Epic Mickey now in hindsight, what do you think about?
I am so proud of that game. Deus Ex and Epic Mickey are, without question, the high points of my career. The opportunity to bring Oswald the Lucky Rabbit, Walt Disney's first star, back to the world. The fact that that happened in a game. I mean, think about what that says about Disney.
He's every day in California Adventure now.
And we did that. Okay, this is a story I should not tell also, but I'm going to tell it anyway.
Please.
I just bought an Oswald mug. Okay.
Okay.
And on the back is Hortensia, Oswald's girlfriend. So it's Oswald on one side and Hortensia on the other. And I suspect no one at Disney realizes that we made Hortensia up for our game. I'm sure people at Disney think Hortensia is a part of Disney's history.
No one's checked?
No one's checked. We made her up, okay? So the fact that Oswald is back and the fact that Hortensia is now a part of Disney's history is because of a video game. Okay,
that's cool.
That's very cool.
Because of your video game.
Because of the video game that my team and I made, yes. But the other thing is, I got more fan mail about Epic Mickey than any game I've ever worked on. It was more heartfelt fan mail than any game I've ever worked on. We touched people in a way that games just never touch people. I got email from people and letters, you know, hard copy letters from people saying that Epic Mickey helped them get through chemotherapy. There was one kid, we were showing the game at New York Comic Con, and a kid in a wheelchair was rolled up by his dad, and he had cerebral palsy, and he was about to go in for surgery, and he asked his dad, he played the game, he had enough dexterity to play the game, and he asked his dad, can I use this as part of my physical therapy after my surgery? And a little while later, I got a letter from the dad saying his doctor said it would be great physical therapy and it had really helped his son out. But here's the one, I'm going to start crying right now actually, but here's the one that kills me. I got an envelope in the mail, and I opened it up and out came a drawing, a colored pencil drawing of Oswald and Mickey. You know, Oswald with his arm around Mickey, Mickey with his arm around Oswald, legs dangling off a cliff, looking up at a starry sky. And it looked like it was, you know, an 8 or 9 year old, you know, kid had drawn it.
Yeah.
I'm getting chills thinking about this. And then I pulled out the letter inside, and the letter was from a father who said, my 16-year-old autistic daughter doesn't interact with the world, but she played your game and drew this and insisted that I send it to you. She engaged with the world because of your game. Screw Metacritic, screw the gamers who didn't like our camera, you know, screw everybody. I am really proud of that game, and I am really proud of the team that made it, and nothing is going to ever sway me from feeling like that was one of the high points of my career.
I don't suppose you have any influence to maybe try and get that game put back out on Switch, or bring that game forward so that it can sort of try to live on more than being tied to the Wii?
Unfortunately, Disney decided they wanted to get out of the game business, and Junction Point was kind of the leading edge of a bunch of layoffs, and they're a licensing organization now, and I have no say. They own it. I have no say in anything that happens at Disney. I'd go back in a heartbeat, actually, if they asked me, but no, there's nothing I can do about it.
So I'm running out of time with you, unfortunately. I want to move quickly and talk about what you're up to now, because it's fascinating that you've almost come full circle in a lot of ways. Other side, entertainment. You've been persuaded to sign on full time. System Shock's being remastered, and you are actively working on System Shock 3 with Paul and some other original team members. Is that just awesome, or is it just anxiety of trying to live up to the original?
No, it's awesome. I've been advising Paul at Other Side for a couple of years now, and one day he came down to Austin and for a meeting that had nothing to do with me, but he asked me to come along with him. And while we're sitting there waiting for the meeting to start, he said, I got the rights to System Shock. And I said, jokingly, I should make that for you.
Yeah, the rights had been tied up in a complicated way for a long time.
Oh, it was insane. And I don't even understand it, so I'm not going to try to explain it. But I was joking. And about 2 weeks later, he called me back and said, you should make that for me. And I thought about it for 37 seconds and said, well, yeah, sure. I was ready to do basically a startup studio again. So I've been building something from scratch, conceptualizing what a modern day System Shock game would be, and having a bunch of fun. It's awesome.
I have to ask you while you're sitting here with me, how's it coming along? Where are you at? When can we see it?
Well, you're not going to see it for a while, I'll tell you that. I used to tell publishers my games take about 3 years to make, and if I tell you I'm going to make a game in less time than that, I'm probably lying. So it's going to be a while before you see it. But we're in concept phase. It's a very small team. It's the lead designer, lead artist, lead programmer, and me. We're concepting it out, trying to figure out what game to make, building some early prototypes that I wish I could show because they're pretty cool. We've come up with one thing that no one in the world has ever seen before, which is one of the rules I have for any game I work on. There has to be at least one thing no one in the world has ever seen in a game. And we think we've got that nailed. Well, we've got it figured out.
What was that for Deus Ex and Epic Mickey?
In Deus Ex, it was it was the combination of genres and the combination of playstyles.
Yeah.
There had been hints of that before, but the idea of choice and consequence was really it. In Epic Mickey, it was the ability to not just destroy the world, but to bring it back. There had been a very few games that had let you destroy geometry.
Yeah.
But I still can't think of another one that lets you bring it back. So that was what the heart of that game was, and I think I know about System Shock 3.
All right, well that's a hell of a teaser. But you guys are also at work. You're involved with Underworld Ascendant, a spiritual sequel. No actual Ultima in this particular case. I guess that's an EA joint these days. But Underworld Ascendant, which is a spiritual sequel to Ultima Underworld. So
yeah.
and that's a little further along, I believe, right?
It is.
I have seen.
It is. It's very close to vertical slice now. Anything you've seen, forget it, because the game has come so far. I mean,
I saw a pretty dungeon. It was a very, very pretty dungeon.
No, you didn't see a pretty dungeon.
Sorry about that. I'm mistaken.
You're going to see a pretty dungeon. Nate Wells, the art director, worked on The Last of Us, Uncharted, the BioShock games. He's really upped everybody's game graphically, let's put it that way. The game is very close to vertical slice, and if I were a betting man, so don't take this as promise, but if I were a betting man, I'd say that the the vertical slice will be released at least to backers, so people might want to go and back the game, even though the Kickstarter is long behind us. So yeah, that's further along, and the team is doing a great job creating a game that will allow players to express themselves through play. Playstyle matters.
Excellent. And then up until you went full-time with Other Side on System Shock, I have to ask you again, I know you've got to get out of here, but you were teaching game design at the University of Texas. So if I take Professor Spector's course, what am I learning?
Well, I built a program from scratch for the University of Texas.
Yeah.
And I looked around. I've been involved with education for quite a while and know a lot of the people who are teaching game development around the world. And though many of them are doing a wonderful job, they're all doing essentially the same thing. They're teaching people how to be great game programmers or great game designers or great game artists. And nobody was teaching the skills of game development, leadership, and management. We weren't teaching people how to be game directors.
Yeah.
Creative directors, or even producers. And so the focus of the program was how to be a game development leader. And it wasn't with the idea that you were going to get out of my program and be the next creative director on Call of Duty 72.
Sorry, Ken Levine, you're out of here.
Nobody had that expectation. But our theory, and it's actually panned out in the way the careers of our students are playing out. But what we thought was, if we taught you how leaders think, what they do, why they do what they do, how they do what they do, it would make you a better team member, a better individual contributor. And that has actually seemed to work. So we took 40 students over 2 years, and all of them are employed, which is a pretty good record. And I think you're going to be hearing from many of them in the years to come.
So you're not currently teaching the course?
No,
is that correct?
it was when Paul Neurath came to me and said you should make System Shock. I was joking because I had a full-time teaching gig, and I left it partly because of the opportunity to do System Shock, partly because I'm sorry, UT, but about halfway through my 3-year commitment, I realized that I'm a guy who makes things. And as much as I loved teaching and I loved interacting with the students, I wasn't done making games, and so the opportunity I had to leave to make System Shock 3.
So I'll leave you last two questions for you, Warren, and I'm curious, because you've had such an incredible career that you clearly still have plenty in the tank, plenty of ideas, but do you think the game industry is in a better place now than it was early in your career as far as creativity and developer freedom and developer recognition, and what do you think is the future of AAA gaming?
Wow, I could get myself in so much trouble. I kind of don't care about the future of AAA gaming. I think the costs are so high, the teams are so big, the risks are so great that we're seeing an awful lot of same old with prettier pictures. I mean, that's a little reductionist, I know, but I don't see a lot that interests me in the AAA space. I spend most of my time at GDC and E3 looking at the indie stuff. That's where you see the...
Have you seen Cuphead?
Have I seen Cuphead?
I just, being such a Disney fan...
Of course I've seen Cuphead. I can't wait for Cuphead. Yes, I have.
Sorry, I totally cut you off, but I had to throw that in. It just popped into my head.
Perfectly all right. But I think you're seeing immense creativity on the indie side. And in that sense, things are way better than they used to be. There didn't used to be an indie scene, and now there are so many ways to make a game. There are so many ways to reach an audience with that game that anybody can make the game of their dreams. I mean, I got the opportunity to make Deus Ex, which was my dream game, but that's because I'm the luckiest guy on the planet. Nowadays, one person in a garage can be Notch.
Or two brothers in Canada with making a Cuphead, hand drawing it. But
exactly.
So, last question. I'm just curious. I suspect I already know the answer based on what you've already said. But you've said you've got more ideas. You've got to make things. Do you see yourself just continuing to keep making things forever? Or is there a point where you're gonna say, you know what, I've done good. I'm going to hang it up and I'm going to go retire on a beach somewhere?
That's an interesting question. I will say I've talked to my students and I've talked to my team about this. I'm one of the few people in the game business who can say what I'm about to say. As you get older, you really do, things change, okay? And I am no longer physically able to work the way I used to. I'm almost ashamed to admit that, but it is a fact. Your body is going to change. And so I suspect there will come a time when I don't have the physical energy or the emotional energy to continue doing what I'm doing. I hope that time is long in the future. I feel like it is.
Yeah.
But retirement, if or when it comes, is not going to be me sitting on a beach. It's going to be me writing, another novel. I've had one novel published. I want number 2. I want it bad. I'm going to be writing comic books. I wrote a bunch of DuckTales comics back in 2013, and I want to do more of that. So there are still things to be made, even if I'm not making games. But like I said, I think the me not making games thing is going to happen far in the future.
Well, we look forward to System Shock 3, Underworld Ascendant, everything you've still got up rattling around in that head of yours, and we'll get to play it on a screen at some point. Warren Spector, thank you so much for coming in. This was an absolute treat for me. Warren Spector, absolute Hall of Fame caliber, legendary game designer. You just heard a walking tour of his resume. For much more from the best, brightest, most notable minds in the games industry, be sure to check back for new segments from the interviews here on IGN Unfiltered every week and new episodes with new creators every month.